Hi, Duncan here. Today I want to talk about the fear of God as opposed to the fear of man. And pretty much want to talk about how being afraid of people and what people think of us, how it will directly rob us of obeying God, and the two are diametrically opposed. We can either fear God and be aware of His presence with us and watching over us in everything that we do, say and think, or we can be afraid of what people think of us. And so, like Paul says in Galatians 1, I think, is it verse 10? I haven't looked it up, 9 or 10. And he starts laying out his credentials as an apostle. And he says, and in that discourse, he says, Am I still trying to please mere men? Am I not a servant of the Lord? And if we want to be a true servant of God, then we have to not fear people. And for many, I think, in ministry, if you're a pastor sometimes and you've got all these people paying your wages, your salary and your staff and the building and everything, the pressure and the temptation to fear people can be big, and it affects all of us one way or another. Rejection, none of us like it, and rejection seems to be one of the big tests that God allows to come at His followers, because it separates our mixed motives. Are we in this thing of walking with God just for ourselves, or are we in it for God and His glory? And the truth is that self-motivations are at the root and at the very depths of pretty much everything we do, no matter how noble our motivations are. It could be quite depressing, but the great news is that we're loved, and it's God's job to deal with that stuff in us, and He does in His way and at His right time. So I've got a couple of stories I want to share about how God started to deal with me with the fear of people and the fear of what people thought of me. And I think one of the first funny times that started happening to me was I was in the bath once, where all the best revelations come. Either that or the toilet, I found, or when you're asleep. And I was in the bath, and I just had this idea of going up to the local woods near me and making a cross. And don't know, was it God that gave me the idea? I don't know, to be honest. It just seemed like a good idea, so I did it, right? So I went up to the woods and took a saw and made a cross, about the size of, about big enough to sort of crucify a 12-year-old maybe. And I remember when I just made it up there in the woods, cut the bits of wood and took a hammer, I think, as well, nailed it all together. And I put it on my shoulder and started bringing it home. And I remember as I came out of the woods, some guy saw me like he was walking his dog. And I'll never forget the look he gave me. And I kind of gave him this sheepish look back, because didn't really like being labelled as a complete nutjob. And which you're probably going to get if you identify with the cross, but certainly if you start carrying one around, you know. And there are a lot of religious nuts out there. This is true. I definitely probably am one. Certainly have been one. Been trying hard not to be one, but I don't think I'll ever be able to shake it off. Anyway, I brought the cross home, yeah. I was living at my mum's house. I shared in a previous video how God did some healing for her soon after I met with Jesus, and in his mercy touched her really amazingly, but she kind of hardened again, even though every time she gets sick again she let me pray for her and God would always heal her. It was amazing. But her heart still remained pretty close to the whole gospel thing. So anyway, I'm staying at her house and I've kind of come back with this cross once. And I stuck it on top of the shed in the garden. Kept it there. And we took it, me and a few friends I was in church with, I remember we took it to some local towns around me. And I had this old gas board van and I used to tie it on top of the roof rack and drive around with this cross on the top. And then we'd kind of take it into the towns and share the gospel, and people got saved, you know. It really touched some people, you know, and it was like, it would kill off the fear of people in me, because, you know, it's a separation point. It was like, you know, there's sort of there is a pride of sort of carrying the cross and identifying with the sacrifice of Jesus and what that means, and yet, you know, and we all, those of us who believe, we all are grateful for that, and yet all of us, if we're honest, balk and shy away quite often from speaking up when we should do, and identifying ourselves as Christians when it's awkward in the face of angry people or opposing people who might have very different ideas. So carrying this cross around was good, and it bore some really good fruits. And then one Saturday morning, pretty young in my faith here, but one Saturday morning I'd walk really close with God, and you know, when you're a youngster in the faith, you know, you hear God really clearly, and I think that's what it talks about in the book of Revelation, about returning to your first love, because there really is kind of like a first love, and the Father loves it, and playing with his little kids, and all the innocence that's there and the wonder. Anyway, I woke up one Saturday morning and I said to God, I said, what are we going to do today, Dad? And straight away I saw in my spirit that I should take the cross that I'd made, because I'd taken it around all the towns around me, but I hadn't taken it to my hometown where everybody knows me. And I saw that's what he wanted me to do, and I really didn't want to do it, because I thought, man, everybody knows me, and that's going to be flipping horrible. But every time I thought about it, as I lay there in my bed, my heart would start to pound, like hard. I think in Christian terms they call that the witness, the inner witness. The Spirit was witnessing to what was occurring in my mind's eye. So it was undeniably to me that this was God, yeah. So I really struggled to get my head around it. I mean, it was really hard. It took me a while, and I was umming and ahhing, and I was just struggling to deal with this one, accept it. Anyway, I walked down the garden, look at the cross on top of the shed, and I kind of pick it up, put it on my shoulder, and the garden was quite long and it opened out into a park at the back. So I thought, I know what I'll do, I'll have a walk around the park first, just kind of limber up a bit, you know, like to kind of get used to it. Try and, you know. So I opened the back gate and walk into the park, and as the park went down, just, you know, about 50 yards further, they'd built this old people's home in the recent years there. And I've got this cross on my back, and I'm kind of walking around this park with this cross on my back, trying not to look at people, just focus on the Lord. And as I did that and just became aware of his presence, I was in that fear of the Lord. You know, I was in that place of being more aware of his presence rather than the people and what they thought of me. He was killing off this fear of people. And I'm walking along and just trying to get the courage to walk into the town on market day on a Saturday down in Berkhamsted. And I've got this cross on my shoulder, and I'm sort of walking around, standing around this park, and then suddenly I look back and I look in the window of the old people's home, and there's about 25 geriatrics sat in a chair looking out of the window across the park, and suddenly Jesus has appeared with a cross on his back. I tell you what, I cracked up inside. I still laugh thinking about it. I don't know, heaven knows what went through their minds that day. Maybe they thought that was it, their time's up. So I eventually walk back into the garden, walk up the garden. My mum sees me as I go out of the side gate. She's in the kitchen at the sink. And see the look on her face, I tell you. She sees me at the gate with the cross over my shoulder, and I look at her and she looks at me, and she's like, her eyebrows sort of mingle in with her forehead, with her hair, her scalp. And I set off down the town. And it was one of the most interesting walks of my life. You know, walking past sort of old teachers of mine, no one would look me in the eye. I mean, it was just like, they'd just look the other way. Who can blame them, you know? But I felt incredible peace, I've got to say. I mean, I was totally aware of God's presence. I could really feel him with me. And he was probably laughing his head off. Maybe he had some pride, actually, and some joy. Maybe he's thinking, yeah, that's my boy. He's not afraid of identifying with me and my cross, and he's prepared to be a fool for my sake. So I see one of my oldest mates, Lewis, still mates with him actually. He sees me from across the street. I mean, he's always thought I was a bit of a nutter anyway, known it, to be honest, but in a good way, you know. And he just points at me and laughs and waves at me, and I appreciated that, and then carried on. And got right into the centre of the town by the town hall next to the market, and put the cross up next to the town hall. I think I had a Bible with me, and I think I read out of somewhere. I can't even remember where I read in the Bible, to be honest. But I remember denouncing the institutionalized, traditional Anglican religious church, and sort of saying how God doesn't live in buildings, but he lives in people, and I remember saying that, and I remember the market clearing really fast. I mean, there was just nobody around, and all the market traders were like really pissed off because they weren't selling any fruit and veg. And one of the market traders, he came up and he grabbed the cross and he threw it down on top of his boxes, his vegetable boxes, and told me to F off, I should think. And then when I was finished talking, I'd done my bit, done what I felt I was meant to say, I went and picked up the cross again off the boxes. And then suddenly this guy that had done that, he suddenly became all really apologetic. And and apologised for throwing the cross on the boxes, and I kind of tapped him on the shoulder with the Bible and said, "Don't worry about it, that's fine, no problem, man." And actually, I'd see him every time I'd see him after that in subsequent weeks and years. He was always really open and really soft, actually, towards me. Quite interesting. That's something else, you know, that sometimes those who oppose the most are the ones that are being challenged the most. And a bit like Paul the Apostle, maybe they're the ones that actually God is calling. You see that in that amazing story of David Wilkerson in the cross and the switchblade with Nicky Cruz, you know. Nicky Cruz was the one who opposed the most. Gang leader that he ended up becoming the famous disciple that he was too in his situation generation. So yeah, and then I made my way home with the cross, and then I got back, and God had done a work in me. I tell you, I felt really proud of myself, and kind of think I decided I wasn't really going to tell anybody about it, but I'm telling you. And so that was very cool. I definitely did a strong work in me, that one. Some years later, in about 1995, I was at home praying one time, and I was walking up and down in the living room praying, and the Spirit really turned up. The Holy Spirit really turned up in a really big way, and I ended up lying down on my back and just receiving from God like a wonderful infilling. And he spoke to me really clearly. He said two things. He said, "I like that in you that goes against the grain." You know, and I've been really struggling with the rejection, and you know, we all want to be loved. We don't want to be rejected. We want everybody to like us. But the truth is, if you want to serve God, that ain't gonna happen. It didn't happen for Jesus. He was despised and rejected by men, like one from whom we hid our faces. And if we're going to identify with him and his message, the same is going to happen to us. And he spoke that to me. He said, "I like that in you that goes against the grain." And I'm blubbering, you know, I'm weeping. God is really ministering to my heart, his affirmation. And then he says to me, "You're my faithful witness," which that's a beautiful thing for him to say to me. Maybe, you know, interesting thing after that was I didn't really but I just didn't feel the same compulsion to tell everybody about Jesus after hearing him say that affirmation, which is interesting. You know, maybe some of my motivation to share the gospel was sort of immature. I'm sure it was, and maybe I was just looking for that fatherly affirmation that I was doing a good job, and could be. Second time, third time, another big season where God started breaking off the fear of man off me in an intense way. Was I alluded to it the other day. I shared a bit about it when I was at a Christian festival, and God told me to kneel down, and then I lay prostrate, and then went out in the Spirit. This whole season in those mid-90s doing that went on for quite a long time. I mean, I would walk down the street, even in my hometown, and pray, and I just have this inner compulsion just to be on the ground, on the floor, and didn't really want to do it, just because, for obvious reasons. But I could feel the draw of the Spirit so strong on me to do that, just to kind of lay down in the dust, to be on the ground, and prostrate, you know, out just before God in public amongst the people, and not wanting to do it, but knowing that in that place, if I was to surrender to that, and just knowing the presence of God is there in that place. And I did it a few times. I mean, I did, you know, sometimes out in the country in the dark in the middle of night when I was out for a jog, and sometimes in the town, in my local town. I remember the police being called once, and they came, and I'm just lying on the ground at that point on my back, I think, because it was just looked a bit less religious. And they came and they would call the sports shop owners, called the cops, and they came round, and they had a really nice attitude actually, and they were convinced I lived on a boat. I didn't have any shoes on. At the time I had quite a good job. Lived in a nice flat, you know. I said, no, I don't live on a boat. I do now, by the way, you know. And we talked quite a bit about reality with these guys, you know, what we consider reality is, and how you might go to other parts of the world and you can sit on the corner of the street, lie down on the street, and no dramas. I'm in Asia at the minute, people lying down on the street, left, right and centre. But you know, how we accrue what reality is in our own individual countries and communities. It's quite an interesting thing. And anyway, there was a lot of respect and love there between me and the coppers. I was learning about authority too, you know, because I kind of wasn't desperately wanting to be down there, you know. I knew I was just trying to be obedient to what the Spirit was doing inside me. And then I said to these coppers, I said, do you want me to get up? Are you telling me to get up from the street? And they said, yeah. I said, great, thanks. I got up, and I kind of knew I was released from the burden of what that was. My biggest fear was